I'm not really sure if this is applicable to the zombie apocalypse, but it is, I guess, applicable in the sense that it's like, what do you do when you're bored, you don't have power, and you still want to have some kind of hobby in your life after the world ends? So I decided I would show you guys how to make a bonsai, or at least how to begin making a bonsai. In my opinion, bonsais aren't bonsais till they're at least maybe like 50 years old, so I consider every bonsai I start to be finished by someone else, probably after I die. I originally started this hobby because I find myself being very impatient, and I thought it would be a good way to teach me some patience. I think you either learn patience for it or you just go mad. And it seems to me like it's kind of a 50-50 so far. I've been doing it for 2 years. Probably not the expert to show you this, but anyone that's interested, maybe you'll learn something from it. Alright, here's our specimen. This is an Olea olive. Allison knows that if she gets me presents that are plants, I'm always happy. So she got me this little guy for Valentine's Day. And also, she found this pot used for like $5, which is awesome. I feel like this color pot and this shape is gonna go really well with the shape of the olive leaves and the kind of drab color of the olive. Now, if you're making a bonsai, you can do this either two ways, by addition or by subtraction. For example, this is a dwarf pomegranate tree that I planted from seed 2 years ago. So as it's growing from seed, I'm kind of sculpting it into what I want it to be. So obviously, this is a very time-consuming and laborious process. The easier and faster way, what we're going to do today, is go to the nursery, buy a tree that looks like it would make a good bonsai, and then just prune it and subtract off. When you're in the nursery, there's a few things you want to look at when you're looking to buy a bonsai or a potential bonsai. First of all, you're not going there to buy a bonsai. Any place that's selling you a bonsai is probably selling you something that you're going to do right now, and you're paying 4 or 5 times the price that you should be paying. The best is to get things in 1-gallon pots, and usually there's a layer of duff right here. This bonsai didn't have that, but if there is a layer of duff, which will come up on the trunk, you want to scratch that away and make sure there's some roots right below the surface. A lot of times they do cuttings and the roots will be all the way in the bottom of the pot, and you'll end up with a trunk that's like way too long for what you're doing. So that's part of the reason why I chose this one, is it's got some developed roots on the top, which usually you do over time by washing away the compost, which makes it look older. Also, you want to look at the branches, and usually you want to kind of go like a branch to the right or left and then alternate. The overall shape of the bonsai, make sure it's healthy, you know, that kind of stuff. Also a good size. You don't want something that's too big, and especially you don't want like really big branches coming off that you're gonna have to cut, because then you'll end up with a cut mark there on the branch. And it'll bush back out and look kind of bonsai-ish, but to me that's a serious flaw in a bonsai, is when you see a big pruning cut on it. Alright, here we go. First we gotta make some soil. For this I'm gonna use a third moss. The moss tends to work as kind of a sponge, so it soaks up water and then releases it to make sure that your bonsai stays hydrated. Since they're in such a small pot, you're gonna have problems with them draining out. Got a third compost, that basically is gonna be like your food for your bonsai. And then also a third grit. The grit's important because if you don't have good drainage, then your bonsai is basically gonna drown, because the moss and the compost really retain so much water. Your first step in creating a bonsai is to sit there for several days and look at it and ponder over it and imagine all the different combinations of trees that you can make out of this one tree. Even doing this, a lot of times once you start working, I don't know, it's like some crazy math problem where you're trying to see all the angles, and yet once one changes, it totally changes everything else. So it's really difficult to completely visualize a bonsai before you start, but you can try and look at some major elements of your bonsai. Before you begin, it's important to think about what type of style you want your bonsai to be. This being an olive tree, looking at the shape of it, I feel like this tree is pretty much ready to be an informal upright. So that's what I'm going to aim for today. In my opinion, making a bonsai is always easier if it has a story. I've had many different bonsais with many different stories. Sometimes the story is that it was growing on top of a rock that rolled away, and so the tree leaned and then it grew up from that leaning position. Or maybe the top was struck by lightning, which changed it and stripped the bark in certain places, or it was burned by fire, or it's just growing in an open meadow, or it's growing in a forest. These all change your bonsai. And so for this bonsai being an olive, I'm thinking that it was planted in some Mediterranean arid area, growing on the side of a dirt road, relatively unobstructed, full light, maybe pruned occasionally, but more or less neglected. Because of that, it's going to be growing upright. The branches will be spread out, only competing with each other for light. When you decide to start working on your bonsai, it's important to work very conservatively. Sometimes you cut a branch, later on you just see how that was the perfect branch to make the whole tree come together. It's a puzzle, you know, basically that's what it is. And so I'm looking at this bonsai and there's basically 1, 2, 3, 4 main branches that could potentially become trunks. They all come off right down here at the bottom. When you're sculpting a bonsai, you want the first branch to come off a third of the way up the trunk, looking at the overall height of the tree. So like these two should not become branches, but they could become trunks of a multi-trunked tree, which is what I'm going for. So with that in mind, these two branches on the bottom, in my opinion, are too symmetrical. You kind of want to stagger them. So I need to take one of them off, and this one on the right is just shooting straight out and going all the way across. It's not really giving me much potential to do anything with, versus this one on the left that has a lot of little sub branches and different things going on. So my first obvious thing, I think, is to take off this branch. Now I'm looking at this bonsai, and to me it's so leafy, it's hard for me to see all the little angles and all the little branches and how they're going to line up. So I'm going to go through and I'm just going to kind of take off the leaves that are actually just on the trunk and on the main branches but not on the tips, which we need to do anyways, because in your bonsai you want to have it so that air and light can penetrate into the tree. And that also gives it the illusion of looking older. You can see how you can get a much better visualization of all the branches and where they're going. Since we've decided that this is the front, we're usually going to work from this angle. Before I was telling you how you want to have your main branches coming a third of the way up the trunk. And so these two branches down here, to me, are coming up too low. So right away I'm going to take those two off. The next main problem I see with this olive tree is that two of your main branches, this one and this one, when looked at from the front angle, are directly in line with each other. This one in the back here is the main branch of the whole tree, and it's kind of leaning back, which is, I find, aesthetically pleasing. So I'm going to leave that one, and this one I need to get out to the right to balance this one on the left. To do this, we're going to start wiring. It's important to have your wire be about the third of the size of the trunk that you're wiring, or the branch. So for bigger branches, you need bigger wire. You don't want to have it tight or loose, and you definitely don't want to rub on the branch at all. This one's close to the ground, so I could secure it by putting this wire in the ground like this, and then the ground would hold it. But I know I'm going to need to move this one over here too. So I'm going to use those two branches to anchor each other. So I'm going to take about half the wire here, enough to do both branches. And this is important. When you go around, you always want to go over the branch. You can see how that's going over the top of the branch, not the bottom. Branches tend to snap down, not up. And so if you don't have support from the top, then they will snap if you bend them down too far. Always try and hold on to the wire. Don't hold on to the tree and twist the wire, or you're gonna mar the trunk. If you hold on to the wire, then you're actually bending the wire to go around the tree. You're supposed to keep the wire going about 45 degrees to the branch. So we have secured both the branches. Now you just take it and gently bend it out to the side, where it will stay. In going with our whole theory of that this is a tree planted along some road in the Mediterranean, these branches are going to naturally grow out to get light and then up. Any kind of curve you can put in your branch usually adds to your tree. If I'm looking at this as the front, the one on the right looks good now. I'm thinking the one on the left is kind of just goes up and out like this, and I'm thinking it's the same thing. I want it to go like this. So I'm going to bend it down first, and then I'm going to bring it back up. More or less, you want the front to be kind of flat, but you want branches going out the back, giving it a sense of depth so that you're looking into it. So I've got these two ones here that are kind of, I've moved them towards the front. So you're going to look through these two, which will frame this trunk in the back, which will be kind of the focal piece. You really don't want things coming straight at you in the foreground, which this branch is coming right in my face. It's also kind of blocking my view inward to see this back area. So I'm going to take that one off. And see, by doing that, see how much that opened up the trunk here, so that's letting light in there. I'm thinking I want these two front trunks to be a little bit lower and this back one to be a little higher, so you're kind of looking over them at this. So now you can see I've accomplished what I set out to do, which is that I created a tree with 3 trunks. This trunk and this trunk are not directly in front of each other. I bent these trunks down and then up so they look like they leaned out to get towards the light, and then they grew up. I took down these two, which were originally way up here, to make this back area the highest point, and I still left some stuff going backwards to add depth to it. Now that the main shape is accomplished, over the years it will fill in very nicely, I believe. The next thing for us to do is to actually get this in the pot. Once you get your pot upside down, if you just squeeze the edges, it should loosen up and you'll be able to pull it off. Right here is the reason why every couple of years you need to take your bonsai out of the pot, trim back basically a third of the roots, and then repot it. Otherwise the roots will fill your pot, it'll become root bound, and your bonsai will become stunted and no longer look healthy and growing. So I'm going to start just lightly working off these roots. I know that all these bottom roots are going to have to go here. People think that if you prune the roots it's going to kill the bonsai. It certainly actually invigorates the tree to do this. This pulls out your potting medium without really hurting the roots, which is good. So when you're wiring your bonsai into the pot, you're going to go up one hole, across, up the other hole. Alright, let's see if our tree is going to fit in here. When you get your tree in your pot, you want to make sure that the trunk of the tree is a third of the way down the pot. So you don't want it directly in the middle generally. And then you got to think about how you want it leaning. So see how this one's leaning like a long ways that way? I kind of want this to be more of an informal upright, so it's going to be more like this. So I'm going to take these two wires, twist them together, which will hold this root ball in place here. Now you just want to take your medium that you've made, tucking it in there, and then just use the back of your fork or some chopsticks or whatever to tamp it down into all the edges. The last thing that we need to do, we're just going to put this moss on the top here. This is called compost. And so here we have our completed bonsai, or our begun bonsai. You'll notice something's not quite right here in terms of the feng shui. A problem with the proportion between the tree and the container. The length of your container should be between 2/3 and 3/4 of the tree's overall height. And you can see here the length of the container is actually longer than the height of the tree. Hopefully this tree will grow into this container over time.